Hello and what's up, political peeps? Per usual, I'm your host, Arif Kapoor, and today I'm coming to you from Connecticut Business and Industry Association's BizCast studio with Foundation Director Dustin Nord. Dustin, welcome to the GeoPolitical.
Arif, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about Connecticut's economy, the Opportunity Connecticut Plan, and your overall goals on making Connecticut a better place to live and Connecticut's economy in general. First of all, thank you so much to the entire CBIA team who is here for the space to record the podcast. It's a really cool studio, and I'm excited to be the GeoPolitical on the road today.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy you're here. We were very excited when we heard you had a podcast during the Civics Beat to have you here at the offices. So we're happy that you're able to make it up. We're very happy to host you.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that story in a minute. But Dustin and I met at the Civics Bee, and it's really youth engagement, particularly in civics, is a important part of the CBIA. So we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But first, Dustin, can you, in essence, give me a little bit of a summary of what the CBIA is and what you do around here?
Yeah, so CBIA has been around for a long time, over 200 years. It's the oldest business industry association in Connecticut. Might be in the country, or actually in the country. Make sure I get that stat right. The oldest one in the country. The foundation was only founded about 2 years ago, though. So CBIA tends to focus on industry-specific advocacy. So during the session, they're doing advocacy at the Capitol, talking about specific laws, talking to legislators. On the foundation side, we're doing long-term economic planning for the state, long-term research, understanding what are the things that are impacting the competitiveness of Connecticut's economy. So we're the think tank of the organization, and that's the piece that I run.
Right, and you, before you came to work at the CBIA, you worked at AdvanceCT, another organization devoted to the economic advancement of Connecticut. Talk to me about how your experience over there has helped you here at the CBIA Foundation.
Yeah, no, AdvanceCT is a great organization. Again, it was a new organization when I joined there too. Economic development, looking to attract businesses to the state and help businesses here expand. And so I worked on their research team there as well. So that was doing background research onto what are the things that are areas that might attract a business to the state. So doing, background research on stats that might be attractive for some of those businesses, trying to put a good look on the state and making sure that we're putting the state in the best position possible to be competitive. That has informed a lot of the thoughts and ideas that I've had, both in terms of what makes Connecticut great and also the areas that we need to continue to improve.
Right. So working on this, and then between your research and all the other tasks you have around here at the CBIA Foundation, talk to me about it, what a day looks like.
Yeah, I mean, the days it's very exciting to be here. There's always something new. So I do a lot of, whether it's working on different types of research projects. So we have our different areas that we focus on, things like business climate, housing, taxes, those types of things. So we might have a specific research project that I'll spend a good amount of time working on. We have our other types of projects that we put out, whether they're small research pieces like on the recent tariffs or, we're going to talk about it, but the One Big Beautiful Bill that passed a few weeks ago. So doing those types of one-off research projects based on topics that are relevant to the given time. And then we have other types of research projects like our Red Book, we're calling By the Numbers, which is a collection of statistics about Connecticut that we're publishing to the public more broadly so that people can have an idea as to how the state is doing in a lot of different areas.
Right. And when you're doing these different projects, right, you did this with AdvanceCT, like we just talked about just a few minutes ago. What is your overall motivation to work in this field of bettering Connecticut's economy?
I mean, I wanted to work in this field. What got me into it initially was the fact that I really love it here in Connecticut. I grew up here. I grew up in Avon. I live in New Haven now. I have left Connecticut, lived in other places, traveled a lot, and ultimately I wanted to come back here. I really enjoy living here. I think it's a really wonderful state, and it's a place that there is an opportunity to speak about the great things that are happening here and help promote it. And there's an opportunity to provide some of my research training and some of my skills to help maybe provide in my own small way, provide some small recommendations that might help make Connecticut a more successful state for everybody.
And one of the major ways you're doing this, it's now about 11 or 12 months since it's been published, the Opportunity Connecticut Plan. We have it right here. It's on the wall. That's your kind of overall, it's a list of solutions. It's an analysis on the state of the Connecticut's economy. And that Talk to me about how you've began executing that over the past 12 months and your success.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Opportunity Connecticut was released last September. That was created with over 30 forums across the state talking to businesses, nonprofit leaders, state leaders. We included a lot of reports from around the state that have been done over the last decade as well to create almost 60 recommendations about how we can improve our state's economic competitiveness. So, initially it was about socializing that plan, getting people to understand why we created it, why we're going on this adventure in terms of the foundation and trying to improve the state's competitiveness. And from there, it's doing further research into the specific topics. For example, in May, we did a research paper on housing, discussing the impacts of housing shortages on the overall economy, on our ability for our employers to recruit talent and retain talent in the state. So that's just one example of a place where we're trying to take Opportunity Connecticut. Some of those specific recommendations are there, provide further insights into those areas, and then hopefully create new policy recommendations as we go and keep this document fresh and relevant as time goes on.
And so you would say the progress is going well so far with Opportunity Connecticut? Absolutely.
We've hit on more than 2/3 of the recommendations the foundation has been able to put some kind of effort into. Some of those have been directly implemented. So during the last session, there were recommendations here that then the advocacy team from CBIA was able to go to the legislature, negotiate, and ultimately create new policies that are in line with some of our recommendations within the report. Other things have just been research projects. Some of it has been outreach directly to advocates or to different stakeholders in the state in those different topic areas. So it's been a very productive year in terms of implementing the Opportunity Connecticut report.
Right. So we're implementing the plan, but at the same time, in the governor's job report for the next 2 years, because this was a budget year in the legislature, he didn't predict any job growth. So despite your work lobbying and working at the state capitol, talk to me about why we're still seeing limited increases in job growth compared to other states.
Absolutely. I think one of the challenges that Connecticut's had for a few years now, and it's been brewing behind the scenes for more than a decade, is that we just don't have enough people in the state. We don't have enough workers. We've had almost 80,000 job openings for the better part of this year, more job openings than we have unemployed persons in the state. We've had relatively flat population growth during that time. We're an aging state. And so when we're talking about a lack of job growth, sometimes that's not always about a lack of demand for those types of jobs.
But jobs are available.
Jobs are available. We're just not able to fill them. And so some of that is related to the work that we're trying to do is get more of the people that are in our state trained up into specific areas where they're in demand, things like manufacturing, healthcare, even things like retail, things that might be great entry-level jobs for folks that are coming out of high school or out of college, that we can then provide them on a path that can lead to future success and have a better overall understanding of how do we support people throughout their lives and not just in grades, K through 12, for example.
An interesting statistic I found when researching for our conversation was actually that Connecticut has one of the highest percentage of the population being part of what we call the upper class, making over $150,000. I'm sorry, that's an incorrect number, but we have about 20 to 25% of residents of Connecticut falling in the upper class range, right? Do you think that has to do with some of the jobs not being filled because sometimes these people are looking for jobs out of state or different jobs that Connecticut, in industries that Connecticut doesn't have home to?
That's a great insight. I think there's definitely part of that. I think it's a combination of things. There is one side, we have great talent and investment in areas that do attract those high income positions, things like finance or, in bioscience and in that side of things. On the research and development side, we have really high world-class engineering in the state. And so we do have that mix of jobs that are very high paid. But I think you hit on an important piece, which is a lot of that has to do with the cost of living of not maintaining those workers who might work here at a middle class income, right? It's not that they don't necessarily want to, but the cost of living ultimately drives them out in a lot of cases, especially on things like housing. I think that's something that we see, that we have that kind of, you hit on what they call skill sorting, right? Which is that we've sorted a lot of those types of medium skilled jobs to other low cost states simply because those folks can't afford to live here. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have as a state.
Yeah, and in your plans, you also identify, for example, shipbuilding as a major industry here in Connecticut, and that some people who are working, on the ground building ships fall into certain social classes or income brackets that Connecticut may not have jobs for those people, or those people people of different classes maybe going out of state to find jobs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shipbuilding is a huge,
Yeah.
especially down in the southeastern part of the state, at Electric Boat and the entire supply chain that surrounds that. And I know that if you talk to them, they're hiring thousands of people. And again, one of the things they talk about is just the challenge of finding that kind of talent. We produce great talent. Our education system is excellent. But one of the groups of people that we actually lose most frequently to people moving to other states is actually in the 18 to 24 range. You know, people when they're first starting their careers, those folks are starting their careers elsewhere. They're either going to college or starting their careers in other states. And a lot of that has to do with the opportunities that we have for them to be successful here in the state at those ages. And part of how we mitigate that is making it a more affordable state overall.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you wrote this housing paper in May. Another reason that people are leaving Connecticut is because it is so expensive. In where I'm from, Fairfield, people live here for generations and generations and generations. But now my generation is finding that we have to leave this Fairfield despite we having generations of family here in Connecticut because of how expensive housing is and the cost of living in Connecticut continuing to rise. So talk to me about, with your housing work, you're combating that and letting more people stay in Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that has to do with a lack of supply, lack of construction of housing. Connecticut has been one of the underperformers. We were second to last in the country for most of the last decade in terms of our housing production as it relates to the size of our population, which I think really gets to the fact that we're just not producing enough of it. And so the people that hits the most are the people that are just entering the housing market for the first time, people like yourself in a few years, right? When you're just getting into college or right out of college, when you need to find your first apartment, need to find your first small house. A lot of those places are occupied by people that have been here for generations. What are we doing to construct the next generation's worth of housing? We have an old housing stock. We don't have a lot of it available. We have very low vacancy rates. And that makes it challenging for people that are just starting off here in Connecticut. And that's ultimately where a major challenge for us in terms of attracting the next generation of the workforce and just the next generation of our communities, the people that we want to be there and supporting the Connecticut community for the future.
But we can't expect population growth and industry development if there's no place for these people to live, right?
Yeah.
You hit on a key point. A lot of Connecticut is zoned in single family homes, and we see that in cities where there's economic boom, essentially, we have denser developments. Talk to me about how we can, working with the state legislature, change zoning laws in Connecticut and really allow more people to live and fit in the land that we already have in our state.
Yeah, I mean, Connecticut is, we talk about how Connecticut's a dense state,
right.
It's the fourth densest state in the country. But in terms of the high density areas, we're actually one of the less dense states. You wouldn't expect it, but we don't have very many high density locations within Connecticut itself.
We don't have huge cities.
No, exactly. The fact that we're very dense is mostly due to the fact that we don't have a lot of rural land as opposed to the presence of high density land. And so I think that's part of it, is building more higher density developments. I think there are opportunities for the legislature to continue to support programs like our Build for CT program, which is a funding stream that they have for workforce housing. It aligns, it's very easy capital for some of these developers to build. It puts those construction projects that are in areas where people already want to build those construction projects, but it provides the funding and the mechanism necessary to actually create them and provide that supply. So I think there are things there that we can do. And on the zoning front, I think one of the challenges there, I think a lot of it has to do with getting the message out to people. I think Connecticut is a place that is very fond of the fact that we do a lot of our zoning locally, and we create a lot of our housing and our policies locally. But at the same time, we need to find a way that we can work together to streamline a lot of those regulations so that whether it's developers, but also businesses just trying to start up in a new location, that they don't have to go through so many hoops that we create for them on that local level. We can create a more vibrant and dynamic economy overall.
Right. And then there's so many different benefits that you get from building better and more dense infrastructure around big cities and expanding metro centers in Connecticut, including a passion of mine. I talked about this at the Civics Bee. We have chatted about this a little bit between ourselves, and I talk about this on my podcast all the time, public transportation and being able to create this equitable means of transportation really only happens when we have dense cities like we see in New York City or Boston or San Francisco, for example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big reason why you see those types of investments in public transportation. Connecticut has made some great investments. Things like CT Rail between Hartford and New Haven has been a great success. I think even more of a success than what they expected. CT Fast Track has been great. New Haven is building a new bus rapid transit, or they're exploring a new bus rapid transit line through the middle of New Haven. And then obviously the New Haven line through southwestern Connecticut is an incredibly important resource. And so part of it is, there's the challenge of the post-COVID world of more people working from home and the financial stability of some of these public transit systems that were commuter based, like the Metro North in the southwest part of the state. And so part of it is allowing for greater density and construction around some of those transit areas. If we can do that, then we can have more usage, more job opportunities near those transit stations as well. Right. And again, it's working with employers about how do we provide economic opportunities for people that live in cities, but how do we get them access to the jobs and opportunities outside of those cities as well, and without necessarily relying on single passenger vehicles in order to do that. And that's a challenge, but something that was part of our recommendations and something that we want to continue working on.
Right, between transport-oriented developments and all these other things, something that we can incorporate into the Opportunity Connecticut plan, right? And ultimately, this all revolves around your commitment to change, right? And to the commitment to furthering the learning, essentially, in Connecticut, so we can build new things and get new ideas in the state. The thing is that in politics, the Democrats have held the majority in the Connecticut House of Representatives and the Connecticut Senate for over 25 years, right? With one party with such a large majority in the House and Senate, isn't it hard to have change?
I think it depends. I think it doesn't have to be that way, and it never has to be any one way. I think when you look at, there are states around the country where there are great examples of, whether they're Republican or Democrat, but they've been able to make significant headway in different policy areas that are of interest to Connecticut. When we look at housing, you look at places like Montana. Montana is a very red state, super red majority that's there, but they've made a lot of progress on improving their zoning regime that they have there to produce more housing. Texas is another great example. It's more purple state now than it used to be, but it's still a place where you have a heavy Republican component, and they've been able to accomplish these things. And on the Democratic side, you've seen a lot of progress in places like California or in Massachusetts or Maine, right? So I think while, we can look to numbers and different things about Connecticut that might make it unique, just because you have a certain makeup of the legislature is not destiny that's ultimately going to lead to one thing or another. We can ultimately, we have a voice in what we can do here. We have the ability to organize around different types of issues. There are plenty of people that are organized around these issues. And so it's just continuing to support messages about why these topics are important for us as a state and why we should be focusing on them. I think that's the most important part.
I think, but beyond this, whether the more important than Democrat versus Republican is that actually having one party who's been in control of all politics in Connecticut for so many years, that doesn't leave room for the people to have like a referendum and change, right?
I think that, I think what you've described is a good example of why it's a challenge when you have, one party that has a lot of control in one place. But again, I think it shouldn't be seen as that's simply because there's one party. I don't think is the reason alone why you might not be able to institute those changes. I think there's ways that you learn to work within the system that you have and the politic that you have. And, I think there's been great progress in certain areas over the last few years. So, that just because you have that type of political makeup, while I acknowledge, I think you're right. I think it presents different kinds of challenges. There's definitely ways that we can still be successful at promoting a better economy for the state without needing to have wholesale changes on a political level, if that makes sense.
But I totally understand that. Another element, though, of political changes and important is that U.S. Congress is old. Our representatives are old. Our senators are pretty old, right? It's important to have youth voices like myself and to go and represent us in Congress and represent new ideas, because if we have the same old ideas going back to Washington, D.C. to represent us or here in Hartford, it's very hard to have change, right? Yeah. So we see John Larson is over 70, the representative here in Hartford. Talk to me about how getting youth involved is important in promoting education.
Was that your announcement for your candidacy to run against Jim Himes down in Southwest Connecticut? I think that, again, I think that you have, these are politicians that I think they're fully competent and intelligent and, hardworking folks. I think, I always hesitate to think that there's one thing that's sort of a panacea for the challenges that you see there. I think that having more youth, a different type of voice, you've seen a lot more people from, the millennial generation, for example, that have been in Congress in more recent years. That hasn't solved, the challenges that you see at the federal level, just because you have a lot of younger people that are there. However, I do think it's important for what I think is more important, rather than just people that are running for Congress or even, participating on that level, is just folks that are participating and lending their voice to the topic. I think you have, whether it's young, this has been a problem in America for a long time, but younger generations providing their voice to issues is an important piece of the solution here, whether they're running or not. So I think there's still a lot more that people can do, whether it's my age or whether it's your age, to be able to continue to participate, to join local boards of, what can you do at your city in order to promote, your local government. I remember when I was actually looking for a job around COVID time, and I was talking to a gentleman who ran a think tank down in Washington, and he was telling me all these things about working in the federal government and working on federal issues. We talked for an hour, super interesting guy. And then at the end, he said, but if you actually want to do anything of value, you should work in local and state government. And that was the last, and I was like, oh, well, I don't know why we just talked about all this other stuff for the last hour. But that's the important thing that I would love to tell more younger folks. If you want to make a difference in your community, there's a lot of opportunities that are there. You don't have to run for Congress in order to do it. So you should get out there and put yourself out there.
Yeah, I'm coming for you, Jim Himes.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, I definitely understand what you're saying. And I think I'm just kind of touching on the different elements of change, right, between political change in terms of the parties in the state, and then the younger voices that we can incorporate into state politics. A very interesting thing related to change that I caught while reading your Opportunity Connecticut plan. I didn't read the whole thing. It's like a lot of pages, but I did read a bunch of it, and I found this Appendix 1 very interesting. You mentioned that in Arizona, for example, states can have a policy where every 5 years they have to look into procedures that they have and see if they have to be repealed. And I'm like, does this ring a bell? Does this remind me of Doge? So I'm thinking we all have the same message, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
it's really interesting how Doge may be doing it in a different way. We all want to make government more efficient, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that Doge kind of in some ways happened in some ways the way it did. It was something that I think when you look at how people view it is not very popular. And I think because ultimately making government more efficient is a challenge. It's not something that's easy. You can't just, beat people over the head until it works better, right? It's something that you have to be very cognizant of how it works. There are things that you can do that are intentional, like what Arizona proposed. I know that there was Lucy Dathan, Representative Dathan from Connecticut, actually proposed something similar this year in the Connecticut legislature that ultimately didn't make it to a vote, but to review some of our regulations and procedures on a more regular basis. That's a great way of, making sure that we're held accountable for not only our current decisions, but also that we're accountable for the decisions that came before us, because we're ultimately responsible, not just for ourselves, but the entire history of what came before us. And how do we, make sure that those things are made up for, the mistakes or the good things, that we take credit, or that we change the things that came before us too.
Right. And I think this is another really important, the third element I'm talking about in the overall argument of change. And it's really interesting to me personally how well received change and a new voice is in the world of politics. So we saw this with Donald Trump. He was weird. He wasn't a politician. He was super unconventional. But in 2016, he was able to get that Republican nomination. He won the presidential race. We see this in New York with AOC. She was able to get out to beat in the primary a congressman who had been in office and was in Democratic leadership for so long, right? So people respond well to change. You just got to put your mind to it and make it happen. Yeah,
exactly. I think there is value to change. There's value to being forward thinking about your topics. I think that I think that is a value is trying to understand what are the things that matter to people today. That is sometimes the value of new people, in whether, no matter what job it is, when you have new people that do something, then they're not burdened by what, their previous decisions are, that they can, potentially go out and do something different. But that being said, I think, as even some of those examples show, that doesn't always lead to great outcomes, but it can at least provide a it provides a platform and a venue for different ideas. But we obviously want to make sure that, before that, we're promoting the ideas ahead of time, that like we're asking people people need to know what they're looking for to begin with too.
Right.
And that's part of where I think the foundation comes in, and where, where you come in, is trying to uncover what those ideas are and help people understand what the issues are, and how they can participate and how they can change their communities.
Right, because change can mean a lot of different things, and we want to make sure we're getting the right kind of change that can overall help our economy, help our state. Right.
Yeah.
A big new piece of legislation from the federal level that is coming into Connecticut, changing a lot of things, helping people, hurting people. There's good, bad, there's ugly. I want to talk about it. You guys are hosting a webinar to talk about Donald Trump's, the House Republicans, the Senate Republicans in D.C., their one big beautiful bill. You're hosting that webinar to talk about the different elements, the benefits for the people of Connecticut, its harms. Just to list a couple things that it will be helping Connecticut residents with. It's providing some levels of tax exemptions for kinds of research and other things for small businesses in Connecticut. There's also an increase in the SALT deduction, and since Connecticut has much higher state and local taxes than other states, that's beneficial to the middle and upper class individuals in Connecticut. Talk to me more about how this bill benefits the people of Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you hit on some of them.
Yeah.
There are things like the changes to the SALT caps. So that's a state and local taxes deduction that you can take on your taxes. I think it's about 11% of Connecticut households were taking that full deduction, which was at $10,000 before. Now it's going up to $40,000. And because we have a high concentration of higher income households, that should see, some of those tax benefits being accrued like disproportionately to Connecticut overall. And then you have things like, your research and development tax credits, or your depreciation, your bonus depreciation that has to do with investment. Connecticut's a big research hub, both for not just, we talk a lot about academic research, things like Yale and UConn, but we're one of the largest for like private industrial research and development funding in the country as well, sort of on a per employee basis. So those types of tax changes are definitely of value for Connecticut. We also have potentially new funding coming in for things like shipbuilding and advanced manufacturing to improve workforce development systems, to provide incentives for expanding those production facilities. So those are areas where Connecticut, again, has sort of a disproportionate size of the overall national economy here in Connecticut. So we might see a disproportionate benefit from those types of funding streams. And then on the challenging side, I mean, I think there were, those benefit cuts that you hear about, whether it's on the Medicaid or SNAP. Those are dollars that are flowing through the Connecticut economy. That's money that was going to hospitals, it was going to individuals. So those SNAP benefits, for example, you only get the SNAP benefit if you spend the money. So when you're not getting that, there's no money spent. So that's money immediately removed from the local economy. And on the Medicaid side, it does present a challenge in terms of, if you have a greater number of uninsured individuals in the state, you have more uninsured care, you have more uncompensated care to hospitals. Those costs do get passed along to somebody, and mostly that's going to get passed along to patients who are insured, right? So that does present a challenge for the economy, where, one of the biggest things we hear from employers continually is the challenge of finding affordable healthcare for their employees. I don't know that this is going to provide a better solution for that. I think it's probably going to make it a little bit more challenging. And then obviously, I think the last big point is about deficits and interest rates, and what this ultimately does for the U.S. deficit.
In the long term.
In the long term, yeah. Our businesses need to invest. Interest rates ultimately impact our ability to invest. And if higher deficits lead to some higher interest rates in the long term, then that might have a deleterious effect on the economy as well.
And going back to the Medicaid, SNAP, Husky element that you just talked about, there is fraud, waste, and abuse, as we talk about when in context of the One Big Beautiful Bill, at the state level in Husky and SNAP and all these other benefits, right? I talked to a few Democratic state representatives. They didn't really give me a solution on how we can find and rule out all this fraud, waste, and abuse to make sure that people now with the limited funding are getting their SNAP, their Husky, their Medicaid. This foundation and CBIA work in the lobbying sense with the state legislature. Talk to me about how you guys can work to identify how we can essentially make this less funding go the full way that we need to fund Medicaid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of where you can, I think one of the challenges has to do, I mean, what you're getting at, I think is a little bit about on the Medicaid side, the work requirements that are being put in. I think that it's going to be interesting how that ultimately shakes out in terms of how many people lose their care as a result, or their health insurance as a result of that. But the state legislature obviously can, that these are the rules of the game now. These are the rules that have been set up. There are opportunities to make sure that, there are most people that are on Medicaid, the vast majority of people that are on Medicaid are working. So how do we make sure that those folks retain the coverage that they are entitled to, right? While understanding that there are these new procedural barriers that are in the way of doing that. And that's something that as a state, we absolutely can solve. I know that there are plenty of people already at the state level that are working on that, but if there are opportunities to support that, I mean, I'm sure that we will find those to help support that. And on SNAP, it's the same kind of thing. It's one of the challenges there has to do with overpayment and underpayment rates, error rates, as they call them, for SNAP benefits. Connecticut has kind of a middle of the pack error rate, which means that we might have to cover more of the SNAP funding going forward. Again, that's an area where now there is a direct financial incentive for the state to invest in making sure that that they reduce those types of payment error rates. And by the way, payment error rates are not just that we're overpaying for things. Sometimes it's that people are entitled to that money and we're not paying them what they're supposed to be. They're being denied access to those goods too. So I think from both a financial and sort of a moral perspective, we have a good reason to continue to invest in making sure that we're running those programs effectively.
Yeah, and it's happening all across the country. State legislators have to find out we can't have undocumented immigrants now that funding has been pulled back. It's time that we make sure that the people who need to get this funding are getting this funding.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. We need to, we know what the rules are now, or I shouldn't say that we know for sure. I think as people interpret those laws and change, people will ultimately know better. But once you know them, it's ultimately in the best interest of all people in Connecticut to make sure that we're doing it the best we can and make sure that people get the things that we say that they should.
Yeah, definitely. And now as we wrap up our time here at the CBIA BizCast studio, you're a Connecticut man, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got to ask, your pizza in Connecticut, is it Frank Pepe's, Sally's? Where are we going?
Yeah, so
what's your pick?
They asked me this in my interview when I started working here. So I have an answer for every single one of them. So you get a tomato pie from Sally's. You can get, I always get a pepperoni from Pepe's. Then there's meatball pizza over at Modern, but my favorite place is Zanelli's on Worcester Street. So that's the place to go. So write that down. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the whole team here at CBIA. I learned a lot today from you, Dustin. I really appreciate it. Personally, I'm Sally's all day for the clam pie, but we'll agree to disagree there. Political peeps, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much to Dustin. Anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you so much, Arv. This has been a pleasure.
I had such a great time. Political peeps, peace out.